Hello, this is Mark from the Way Back Meditation, and this is podcast number 34, I believe. Now, this podcast follows on from the previous one, which was about having more God in your life. And I'm going to be sharing a very short message that is really kind of follows on directly from that previous podcast. So if you haven't already checked out that podcast, then it might be a good idea to go back and have a look at or listen to that podcast first. But this is also a special podcast because for a change, I'm actually joined by someone else. So I've got my dear friend and fellow meditator and spiritual someone on the journey with me, who's called Nick.
Hi, thank you, Mark, and thank you for inviting me onto this. It's a welcome surprise.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very good to be here, and hello everybody.
Well, a surprise might be appropriate because Nick doesn't actually know what the content of this podcast is going to be. And I thought it'd be nice for him not to know in advance so that afterwards we can discuss this message without Nick having thought about it or prepared anything. So I apologise now, Nick. I'm kind of throwing you in at the deep end here and putting you on the spot. But I think with all these things, I said you're a fellow, and it's hard to find the word, a fellow person on the journey, because it's a personal journey. But each person who's on that journey is bringing their own experiences along on the journey as well, and their own insights. And so with this message that I'm about to read out, I think it's great for me and for everyone who's listening to have someone else to kind of explore it with. Yeah. So I really do appreciate you giving your time and making yourself available. So without any further ado, really, I'll read out the message. Now, I don't normally, some of the podcasts I do, but normally when it's something very important, then the message has already come, and I'll read it out to make sure I get it word for word. So we begin. Knowing about God is not the same as having God in our heart or loving God. It is as distinct as the difference between night and day. When it is dark, you know the light is there. You believe it, but you cannot see it. But those who love God have God in their hearts, have constant light. They are filled with the radiance of God's light and with joy. And this in turn radiates out through their auras and affects those around them. So it is not enough to believe in God. You need to have God in your hearts, permanently. When you love someone, you keep them in your heart. When you love God, you keep God in your heart. That's it. Really simple, nice message. And it's so obvious. But I won't say anything else. I want to know how that resonates with you, or does it not?
Well, 100% that resonates with me, and almost identically to when Mark and I met previously and we discussed another topic. There were coincidences that had occurred, so I feel it's appropriate for me to share a coincidence that's occurred here.
All I'll say is don't name any names.
I will not be naming it. There's no need to name any names,
Okay.
Because it involved me. So I can't remember exactly, but a few days ago, maybe even a week ago, I can't remember the exact date, but I was going to contact you actually because I had this wonderful feeling and this wonderful thought and it involved having God in my life and having made the connection with God and experienced God in my life. And I had this thought that I will never again have to think or know that I'd have to not question whether God existed or whether it would be. I just knew that there was always going to be that connection now, whatever happened. And it was an absolutely wonderful feeling. And I was going to share it on the group chat, but then I thought, no, I'll speak to you next time. And I didn't know when that next time was going to be, and it's happened to be now. So there you go. So that's from the heart, genuine. That's just come out now, having heard that message. So thank you for the message, and it was nice to actually share those thoughts because I haven't actually shared them with anyone else until I'm sharing it with everyone here. So
Well, it's a privilege I'd say to be the first to hear it, but
yeah,
and everyone who's joining us. No, that is really wonderful, and that's kind of, I guess, what we're aiming for. Right back in the early days when I was teaching, even before the way back, I would make the point of saying, look, especially when you're talking about God, people are going to jump all over it and go, look, are they talking about religion? Are they talking about some guy in a book? That kind of ideology. No, absolutely not. We've always been very open and upfront about the fact that spirituality is not about believing anything. It's about knowing in a way that cannot be shaken from you, from your own direct experience. In other words, it doesn't matter what anyone else has experienced. That's wonderful. It may be inspiring. It may sound great. But if you haven't experienced it, then it doesn't have value. The spiritual journey is about you finding out for yourself from your own direct experience. And this is kind of what these words speak of. So knowing about God is not the same as having God in our heart. Lots of people know about the word God. And with that word, there'll be lots of ideas and beliefs. But those beliefs are simply ideas that haven't been challenged. If you go beyond belief to what you're describing, that knowingness, then it might be that you can't articulate it necessarily, but it doesn't matter because it cannot be taken away. That's my experience of it. And does that resonate?
Well, that's pretty much exactly what I described, that feeling I had of that something that can never be removed from me. So it can never be removed from me and never be taken away. And it was just a wonderful feeling.
Yeah.
So I'd never have to think about it again. It was always there. That connection was always there. So it was great.
I know there's no judgment, so it's not for me to judge anyone. It's not for you to judge anyone. And the people listening, if you haven't already been to our website or looked at some of our other teachings, one of the core teachings we share with people, which are, again, it's not about gathering information. So when we say teachings, it's not about read this book, study this article, and you will be enlightened. It's not. It's about experience. So any guidance or teachings we give are fundamentally simply to help orientate you to learning through experience. So, for example, when we talk about spiritual light, and Nick's someone that has received initiation, which means that they've started. So initiation means to begin. So Nick was initiated, i.e. he received access to the spiritual light or the light of God a few years ago now, I think. Yeah. And up to that point, I'm using this as an analogy, up to that point you could read articles about it and we talked about it, so you had a lot of information. But it was only when you sat down in meditation and went inside and moved beyond the mind, which is the thing that wants to know and gather knowledge, that you had experience of the light. And so by way of example, is it fair to say that the light exists?
For me, 100%.
Yeah, and can anyone challenge that?
Well, they can challenge it, but obviously, they can't take away my knowing. For me.
So from your experience, it cannot be, that knowing is deeply rooted. It's beyond a belief.
Yeah.
Because you close your eyes, it's
experienced
there.
it. Yeah.
And so it's the same. This is what this is really, I think, alluding to, is that so many people know about God, but they don't have that inner. It's gone beyond a belief. It's gone beyond knowledge of the mind.
Yeah.
And that's not criticism. It's almost like you want to say, there's more. It can be more profound. It can be life-changing. It can be so transformative. But I guess a lot of people, maybe their first encounter of the idea of God is very religious.
Well, there's a stigma attached to it, always. Well, there seems to be for a lot of people. Yeah.
And we, when I started talking openly, publicly about God, obviously people are going, well, is this a religion? So we've had to write a little article about the difference between religion and spirituality. No, this is not religion. We don't want you to believe a single word. We want you to find out for yourself. And therefore it's about empowering someone, not telling someone what to believe. And equally, for some people, religion gives them a lot, helps them a lot, supports them a lot. So we're not saying that doesn't have value to them. But what I would say is, you do not find God in a church or a building or in a book. You find God in your heart. So if they're always referencing God in something, God in the scriptures, or God in the songs, or God on the wall and the statues, or in that way, then they're not actually referencing their personal relationship with God, which is the whole point of becoming spiritually awake.
Yeah.
You know.
And I guess there's one thing else that I would share that came up when you read that to me, and it's something that also is personal to me and occurred. It was when I would talk to God, it changed from talking, like we were just saying, talking about God to talking to God. And that's something I've experienced probably more over the last, I don't know, maybe 2 months or more. There's actually, you know, and it's going back to that. You're rather than referencing a point, like, you know, in a book, I'm actually talking to that person and connecting with that person. But that doesn't mean that would be the same. I'm not saying that would be the same for everyone. That was just from my experience.
And I guess I always strive to try and be as clear with people as possible, especially in these podcasts, because different sentences, different words will resonate with different people depending on where they are in their journey. So can we just clarify a little bit about what you mean by talking to God? Do you mean you're having a two-way conversation?
Not that I'm listening. No, I'm not receiving information, not in that way. But when I am talking to God, if it's a prayer or whatever it might be, I wouldn't be the way I'm referencing God. I'll be talking. I feel at least I'm talking directly to God, rather than referencing a thing called God.
Yeah. So what you're saying is you have a sense that God is there.
Yes.
And so your prayer isn't, say, like a message in a bottle going
to a
off into
third party,
void.
or whatever. That I'm not sure it's 100% there. It's
In other words, there's a certainty that someone is listening.
Yes.
And obviously, Nick, I know that you're not having a two-way conversation with God. I just wanted to clarify it for the people because someone's going to listen to this and go, so that guy Nick said he talks to God. And
there is history of that being taken out of context. So yes, that's not what I'm saying.
Exactly, and that's why. Because I think most people are, certainly, hopefully, people that are drawn to listening to these podcasts are guided because they are spiritually awake and can find their own realizations and find their own way with what we're saying. I mean, this is the beautiful thing about words, is us talking about God isn't the same as someone realizing it for themselves, but hopefully by talking about it, especially just talking about it conversationally like this, it makes it acceptable to people. Because one of the things that feedback I've got since I've done, certainly since I revamped the website recently and I removed a lot of the content and just simplified things down to what really matters, which is about I'll let people discover that when they go to the website, which is thewaybackmeditation.org, in case you didn't know. It gives the first paragraph, the first sentence mentions God in a non-religious way, and I think that's quite refreshing for a lot of people, because up till now, a lot of people have had a sense of there's got to be something greater, there's got to be, there is something out there, but they didn't want to fall under the label of religion, because then you have to almost feel like you've got to buy into all of the stuff that doesn't sit so well with some people, or isn't where they're at. And I've come at it, as you know, from a very spiritual point of view, and seeking truth, seeking inner stillness, seeking the light, and discovering, after many, many thousands and thousands of hours of meditation and many years and decades of meditation, enlightenment. And it's the light of God, and it's realizing one thing everywhere. The truth is that there is God. Even now, I wouldn't be foolish enough to try and tell people exactly what God is, because no one can know that, even when you're enlightened. God is the enigma and the mystery. But the fact that what's so humbling is that it is actually possible to have God in your life and to go beyond just it being an intellectual pursuit. And this is one thing I really wanted your take on, because I know from talking to people when I released the last podcast, How to Have More God in Your Life, people got a lot from it, and some people were moved to tears in a positive way, listening to it. And one guy gave me wonderful feedback, and he on YouTube, and he said he listened to it 4 times over several days before he finally, something clicked inside him. And I really respect that, because he understood that it's not about intellectually understanding, it's about kind of getting past the intellectual side of things. But some people struggle, and that's natural as well. And the struggle is always the mind, because God, these bigger realizations and states and stillnesses have nothing to do with the mind, but we come at them from the mind. And the reason why I think you've got a very potentially helpful perspective for people, I'm going to kind of throw a question at you in a moment. But it's to answer the question, well, but how? How do I have love for God? How do I love God, you know? And I would say, well, Nick, you're a father of kids, yeah? You've got more than one.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you love them?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have to sit down and figure out how to love them?
No. It's a very natural thing.
Yeah, it's a very natural thing. And,
Yes.
and do you have to check yourself to say, like, you wake up and go, do I have love for my kids?
I don't. They push me sometimes, but no, I don't. You know, and this is not, again, not a judgmental thing, but this is, if you have had children, and some people, yourself included, haven't had children, but that moment, it's not a I wouldn't say it's life changing, but it's that moment when you do first hold your child. It's a new thing, but that love is literally, it's obviously always been there, as I understand, but it's for you, it's allowing that new, a massive, amazing feeling of love towards that child to pour out. So yeah, it's 100% there. And I guess you're trying to, well, I'll let you come to your question, but yeah.
Well, no, you've kind of answered it. And
yeah.
the question was really to, by analogy, show, look, did you have to learn how to love them?
No, it's just there.
Do you have to check whether you have love for them?
100% not.
But it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be there forever. And it's that kind of thing where I think when people are trying to analyse it and go, well, do I have enough love for God? Or, well, how do I have love for God? Or, all of these kind of questions that the mind can ask. That's why it's nice to hear that analogy of, look, a parent doesn't have to ask if they love their children. They don't have to look for it. It's there. And so if you're having to look or analyse or think, you're going in the wrong direction. You're looking in the wrong place. You're looking with your mind for something that's in your heart.
Yeah.
So that's really nice. I think it's that certainty, I think, that's so empowering when you go, wow, I've made that connection. And there are things people can do. And actually, because you've recently had this whole kind of, to paraphrase it, switched on, and now it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything particularly that brought that about?
I don't know if there's anything that brought it about, but there's certainly things that you had said and that I'd heard on your podcast, and things that helped to some extent, I guess. And one of those was that you don't have to ask for love from God. You don't. It's there all the time, and it's almost like plugging into that connection. That was a strange analogy, but it's like, don't try and, for me, it was don't try and pull that love in or whatever. It's always being sort of poured out to you. It's just allowing it in. And I think that made a big difference. And there was a touch of letting go of the ego. And I think that comes to the, how do I love God? It's like, well, can I say I love you, God? It's like, well, you wouldn't have to say, can I love you to my children? It's like, so that was another thing, overcoming that thing about ego. For me, maybe it was, but it was very easy to do.
Well, I think you touch on ego there. And you said the word connect twice, actually. And I think I'll pick up on this just a little bit so that we don't portray the wrong information. We're not advocating that anyone sits down and tries to kind of like create a tether or a connection to God. God is, let's keep it really simple, one thing everywhere. Okay, from that perspective, God's love for humanity, for the people listening, is already there. It's behind them, in front of them, it's around them, it's within them. Or it is within them if they open up to it. And this is the thing, so you don't have to call it down or reach out for it or connect and like put the jack lead in and open the valve. But there are things you can do practically, because every transformation starts, ironically, when we talk about the mind holding people back, but every transformation starts with knowledge. So you have to know that there's the potential. This is why talking about God brings awareness of God. But then you need to move past it. But it starts with knowledge. And so if you say, I welcome God into my life, that's profoundly powerful. If you say, I open myself to God's love, or I want God's, God in my heart, God in my mind, these kinds of things. And we've been talking about this on podcasts and videos now for a few years, and we're not the first. But the point is that God's already there. You're already ready for God. And really, I'm kind of reiterating some of the things that were said in the previous podcast now. what this message speaks to me about, okay, so people now understand about God in a spiritual way, that you can have God in your life and God in your heart, and it's not religion. Because let's face it, God existed a long time before anyone created religion, okay? It's about saying to people, don't stop at the knowledge, go further, make it real, connect with your heart. Just have the intention to come from your heart is so powerful. And if, for those people that maybe are listening to this and feel a little bit tied up in knots about, well, I want to have God in my life and I want to love God, but I don't know how to start, and just take a deep breath, stop. There's nothing that you can think or do really that's going to make it happen. You've just got to be like love. So love is neutral. God's love is unconditional. It's the highest form of love. He loves, or God loves you unconditionally. No disrespect to Nick, but your love for your children is totally conditional because they're your children.
Yep.
And I know that might surprise people hearing that, because quite often when I talk and give talks about unconditional love, one of the things a lot of people say is like, well, I love my children unconditionally. What they mean is, I love my children no matter what they do.
Exactly.
But they love them the way they love them because it is their child. And I said, well, if you felt exactly the same level of love for someone else's child that you've never met before, then that might be unconditional. But because it's your child, it's like the love between two people. It's conditional because you love them because it's them, Whereas God loves unconditionally, whether people love God back. So this is just saying, well, love God back. Any final thoughts, Nick?
No, I think it's an amazing, timely message for me. It's just that the fact that tied in with what you said. But I guess the thing for people is to, it's their own journey, but it is just to allow things in, and just not saying anyone is creating barriers, but just not to have anything in that might be stopping them from connecting or having that love in their life. It's I was a person that questioned all the time. When you talk about an intellectual, challenging things intellectually, I don't know if you know anyone that did that more than anyone else, but and if I was able to do this, then
we're not giving out badges for people getting in the way, but I've known you a long time, and you've known that I've been doing this meditation since I was probably about 18, 19, but you weren't ready.
Yeah.
And there's no judgment in that. And then you were in the kind of like questioning everything, but going down every rabbit hole and getting distracted. And this is partly why we've simplified the website and really just brought it back down to what really, really matters, which is it's about you and it's about God and it's about love. Cannot get simpler than that. But this is spiritual. This is not, again, a belief system. Beliefs are just what get you out of bed in the morning until you know better. Then you move on and you can be anchored in truth. But it's interesting, I think we'll just close on this, but you just mentioned something about things people do to get in the way or to hold themselves back, some words like that. Because obviously I'm working with people around the world, and I'm just reflecting on some of the people who've asked for guidance with this. And I think there's a couple of different, maybe 4 different kind of archetypes that people might fall under. So it might be worth just mentioning them so that people can relate to where they're at. So one of them is the overthinking. So just like I say, like literally they're trying to measure, well, how much love do I have for God? Where is it? Am I doing this right?
Where does it go?
All of these questions.
Yeah.
And so they're in their mind. And quite often if you ask them, do you have love for God? Yeah, I've got loads of love for God. What they mean is they think they love God intellectually, but they haven't dropped down into the heart. So it's just in the mind, yeah? The next ones are the ones that are and they're all genuinely good, beautiful people. But the next way that I've seen people really kind of slip up is they have love for God. Now, I said God's love is unconditional and it's the highest love. So the love for God should be reflected in your love for God. So if you think about the classic things in life, relationships, health and wealth, so careers and things like this, I know people who are struggling to connect with God in their heart because they're putting other things first. Now, we're all, the humility means knowing that you're incomplete, and what completes you is God. In a very simple way, that's why you need to be humble on this journey. So if you're trying to fulfill your sense of value, purpose, happiness through career or relationships or pleasing your family or these kinds of things, then what happens is it stifles your love for God. I'm simplifying it greatly here, but whereas when you put your God first, then that means you love God completely, unconditionally, and then everything else flows really great and with ease from that, because you've put the thing that is first. In other words, it's not upside down, it's not going to fall over. And so sometimes genuinely lovely people, and they've got love for God, but they're stifling it because they're not allowing their love for God to respect as putting God, to manifest as putting God first in their lives. Okay? So there's the overthinkers, and there's the people that are perhaps need to just look at are they putting things before God in their own internal ecosystem. Mm-hmm. It's not a judgment. It's just that maybe they haven't realised that, and so if they put God first and really surrender to God's love, then they will love God fully, and then everything else will fall into place with ease. And then you've got the ones who are intellectually, and this is slightly different from the first lot, but intellectually they've decided that they're very spiritual. So you ask them, have you got, what's your relationship with God like? And they go, oh, God's in my life, God's in my heart, it's all sorted. Now, as you know, because being an enlightened person, doing this for many, many decades, there's a certain level of ability to go inside and access intuition and other things, and to be guided and to get information. And so we can, if it's necessary to help someone, see whether there are, for example, blocks within them or within their chakras or within their heart center and things like this, or do they have love within them, or is it flowing, is it not flowing, is it getting stifled, and all of these things. And surprisingly, some of the people that are most adamant about having love for God don't have any, because they lack that humility. So for them it's almost like is it a status thing or a token? But they're not doing anything wrong, they don't realise they're doing anything wrong. So this is why it always comes that we must be humble. So when we got this message, it's obvious that it's saying this message wouldn't have come if it were not for the fact that not everyone has God in their hearts. So it's not a criticism, it's a wake up. It's keep going. Go deeper, yeah? But if you don't have humility, you'll think you're already there and you won't go deeper. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
No, there was another example, but off the top of my head, I think 3 is enough. And hopefully that resonates with people. And if you're listening to this, remember, our goal here isn't to convince you of anything. It's to just inspire you to find out for yourselves. That's how each of us have come along this journey, and we're still on this journey. There is no destination, it is a way. It is the way. And so the joy, as it says here, they are filled with the radiance of God's light and with joy. The joy is real. I don't know about you, but I really feel just blessed to have started this. I don't think it's ever over.
No.
And so, yeah, I think that's all we need to say, really. So thank you, Nick, for joining us.
And thank you for giving me this message and the chance to respond to it, actually. So.
Well, in which case, we thank God.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, God.
And for all of you listening, God bless you. And check out some of the other podcasts. And there's lots of, pretty much everything we do is free. So go to the website if you want to find out more. Take care.